lot of schools have gone test optional. In addition, the University of California and the California state systems, which I guess together amount to about 23 universities, maybe more, as of a recent court order, apparently are going to have to be test blind, which means not only do they not require students who haven't taken a test or don't have a test score they want to share it, they won't even look at the scores of students who do want to share them. So that is a seismic change in the college admissions world, and that may end up being a permanent change. So what should a student do with these circumstances? Well, if you have a test score, terrific. Send it in if it strengthens your application. Preferably, you want a score that is above the midpoint for admitted students, and you can find that range on a college's website. There will be a, you know, in the admissions section, there will be something like admitted student profile or something like that, and they will have a range of the mid 50%, the 25th to the 75th percentile of their students, and you can kind of, you know, do the math and figure out where the midpoint is. If your score is at about the midpoint, or certainly if it's higher, go ahead and send it in because it may very well help your application. If you have no scores, only test if you feel that you will be safe, and only if you believe that you can score well. It's not worth it to put your own health in danger, or your family's members, or your friends or other people's health in danger by taking a standardized test. It's not necessary. It also doesn't make sense to do it if you have test anxiety, if your practice tests have not been going well, and if you just don't feel that the score that you get is going to help you in the admissions process. There's just too many risks involved. So I would only encourage a student who is certain that they will do well and who lives in a community or is registered at a test site that they know is going to be very well managed and very safe to go ahead and take the test. Otherwise, don't test. So what do we do about activities? It's certainly been hard for athletes, especially team sport athletes. It's been hard for performers, singers, actors, dancers, when we can't have any performances. It's been crazy. So the first thing I would do is say, be creative and modify your current activities. Try to see if you can find ways to still do them in some form or fashion. So try to shift to online. There are choral groups that have been practicing together by Zoom. If there is something that you used to do in person that you can do on your own, if you're an athlete and you want to continue training, even though it's a team sport, you can work with others while socially distanced carefully. You know, definitely make sure that that's done by the book. But there are some athletes who have been doing team sport practices, but in a very careful, socially distanced way. You know, it's just, you have to be very, very creative, but not everything has to come to a complete standstill. The other thing you can do is try something new. I know a student who over COVID decided to pick up the ukulele. She had never played it before. She had way too much time on her hands, and she's like, what the heck? I've always had this ukulele around. I'm going to get on some YouTube videos. I'm going to learn how to play it. You can pick up a foreign language with Duolingo or another software program. You can learn to code. There's a website called Codecademy, which allows you to do self-paced programming language learning. And I know someone who learned how to code in Python due to their Python class. You can take up photography or an art or a craft. You can give yourself a reading challenge. Say you want to read all of Dostoevsky's works, you know, because you're really into Russian literature. But just be creative. Don't think, oh my gosh, I have nothing to do. I'm just going to sit here and play video games and, you know, do stuff on TikTok. Be creative. Think about what interests you, what you would do if you were on a desert island and didn't have video games or a phone, and try to broaden your mind, deepen your interests. Just be the interesting person that you're capable of being. So during COVID, because there's going to be fewer students with test scores, and because the activities are going to be a little different, applications are going to be a little different, or the way that they're going to be assessed will be different. Transcript with the course rigor and grades is going to be even more important than ever, because that was one of the two pieces that went into academic achievement, right? Without test scores, college is going to be looking much more closely at grades and at how challenging your coursework was for you. They're going to be looking at your activities list, recognizing colleges totally understand what's going on. They know that you can't get together and perform your spring musical. They will understand that your team sport might not be able to operate the way it used to. So tailor your activities to safe ways of practicing them, but try to maximize them and put them on your activities list. Colleges will understand and they'll be very interested. And in fact, they're going to want to know that you had the resilience and the imagination and the persistence to find a way to keep yourself occupied. Personal and supplemental essays will be important. Counselor and teacher recommendations, always important, even in the age of Zoom instruction. And then finally, admission and alumni interviews are, and probably I should say more admission than alumni, are probably going to be more important than ever, because colleges really want that additional touch point. Since they're losing the test scores and they know that they're losing some of the activities students can do, they want more information. And I'll talk about that a little bit more next. So getting to know colleges is different. We all know about the fine tradition in our area of everyone taking time off at spring break and going to visit colleges and doing the grand tour in the summer, going to information sessions, and maybe having an interview on campus, and of course doing the beautiful tour of the leafy green campuses. Many of those have been canceled, although some of them are beginning to open up in a very modified way. What you can do is actually quite extraordinary now. Colleges were forced, when COVID hit, to completely revamp the way they communicate with students. They did amazing things, creating recorded and sometimes live virtual campus tours with, the tour guide holding their phone or with a camera person following them around campus to visit the different buildings and different areas of the campus. They have events for juniors. They have information sessions, some of them recorded, some of them live. They have video and text chats with admissions officers or with students who work for the admissions office. It's just extraordinary. And one of the good things is that even once the pandemic subsides, colleges are determined to keep these things online, because they recognize that historically a lot of students weren't able to visit their campuses, and now this is a real opportunity for students to get to know them who might otherwise not have been able to get there. Interestingly, this time of year, before COVID, admissions reps would be crisscrossing the country, visiting high schools, attending college fairs, getting to know students one-on-one, in person. Now they are all stuck at home, just like the rest of us, and they have time on their hands. And what they really, really want to do is meet students. So they are very available by email, by Zoom or telephone to talk to students, answer questions. So if something is really confusing you, or you're really interested in a particular aspect of a program, but you don't know how it works, or you're not quite sure, for example, if when you apply to a college, you have to apply to a specific major, or can you apply undecided or uncommitted, all of those things you can actually ask admissions, and they'll be more than happy to answer you because they're home. They're willing to take your call. In addition, many of them want to interview applicants now. We've always had interviews with alums at the smaller and mid-sized colleges, but now it seems to be more and more the admissions folks themselves, because again, they have all this time and they want the additional input. They want to get to know you better so that they have a fuller understanding of who you are when they look at your application. In addition, high school students should really work their network. Get on Instagram, see who you have on your friends list that goes to such and such a college. Get in touch with them and send them a text, talk to them, see if they can tell you about the campus vibe, what they like about it. And if that college allows people to come onto campus, formally or informally, and some of them don't, some of them are literally closed to visitors. But if the college does allow it, and if you can make a trip up there, maybe you can meet with that student and have them show you around the campus a little bit, even if the college doesn't have info sessions and tours of their own. Be sure that you're following the rules, though. Do not try to show up on campus to a college that says explicitly that they're closed. That's not going to be a good situation. But to the degree that you can visit a campus, even if they don't have formal events, you can still try to leverage your network and get an informal tour. Finally, I think families really need to find out how each college handled COVID. This has been a really difficult time for colleges. It's very expensive to handle a pandemic. It's very difficult to get 20,000 or 30,000 students to take tests, COVID tests. It's very expensive to run those tests. It's just a very trying time. And some colleges have handled it much better than others. The result is that some colleges have had to close to on-campus instruction altogether. Some colleges opened and then closed and then opened again. And some colleges have managed to keep things open and running. But do your homework, a little bit of Googling, never hurt anybody. You can find out how a particular college has handled COVID and get a sense to whether, given that COVID is probably not going to go away right away, how you think they might handle things going forward and whether that's a college where you really want to be. So I'm going to give you some do's and don'ts on how to prepare for college admission. I'm going to start with the don'ts. Don't contort yourself into what you think colleges want, because they don't want any one thing. Make sure that you are uniquely and truthfully yourself. So whatever interests you is what you should pursue. And, just take it from there, and whatever college you're interested in that matches up with who you are is likely to work out. Don't take a course load that's so heavy, so heavy that you're always stressed out and unhappy. Listen, school can be really tough, and certainly the honors classes and AP courses can be tough. Some students kind of thrive under that pressure, but other students really, really have a hard time. And you have to know what the boundaries are, what limits you want to set, and make sure that you're true to yourself and what you can handle and what you want to handle in terms of the amount of work that you do in high school. Don't participate in lots of extracurricular activities. Granted, in COVID, it's a little more difficult to do, just briefly and superficially, because you just want to rack up a list of 20 activities that are just an hour a month. Colleges will see right through that. They'll see it as resume padding, and it's not a good look, and you're not really contributing to a community or to your own intellectual interests. Don't give up on activities during COVID. Now's not the time to burn through Netflix and play Grand Theft Auto, whatever it is, day and night. Try to make sure that you're still feeding your brain, that you're still keeping active, that you're still doing things that are meaningful and interesting. Don't focus obsessively on being the president of every club. Leadership is great. Leadership titles are great, but they shouldn't come because you're scrambling for them. They should come because you really want to improve an organization, that you have good ideas, that you have really good leadership and collaboration skills, and that you have something to offer the organization to help make it better going forward for all of the members. Don't take on or continue activities that really don't interest you. If you have been playing the viola for 7 years and you are sick to death of it and you don't want to take it anymore, stop. That doesn't mean you stop and then do nothing. It means you stop and you redirect your energies to something else that interests you. Maybe you like business and you want to take a business course online. Maybe you want to start your own business. Just make sure that you use your time and energy wisely and on things that you genuinely want to pursue. So what should you do? Well, you should take the most challenging classes where you think you can earn an A and you're certain you can earn a B+. You don't want to take AP World History and get a C-. So it's always difficult to make these decisions. Just do the best you can with the information you have. It's hard, you don't know which teacher you're going to get. You don't know if the course will change from year to year. Your best friend hated it, but she doesn't really like the same things you do. these are tough judgment calls, but in general, try to take the most challenging classes you can, that where you think you'll earn good grades and where you think you can manage the workload. When you are in class, even if it's by Zoom, try to contribute to classroom discussions, because what colleges want is active, engaged students, learners who are going to sit in a classroom and make the conversation go forward, get some interesting topics going, and just keep the environment lively and interesting and respectful. And this is important, and I'll tell you why later. Explore different activities to find what you enjoy. Just because you've been doing something since 5th grade doesn't mean you have to keep doing it. And just because you've never tried something before doesn't mean you shouldn't now. Try it. Now's the time when you're in high school to explore lots of different activities, whether they be athletics or in the arts or something intellectual or just some cool hobby. I don't know, building model airplanes. That could turn into a whole fascination with World War II. You know, it's amazing where one little interest can lead you into other interests and really develop you into a much more interesting person if you give it a chance. And so when you have an interest, there's not just one way, one path to exploring it. You can develop it through volunteering. You can get a job related to it. You can do your own self-directed learning with books and podcasts and YouTube videos. There are a lot of different ways to explore something that you think is kind of cool. And exhibit leadership, not just by being president of the club, but by taking initiative, solving problems, helping other people, starting something new. You can exhibit leadership without having a group of people underneath you. You can exhibit leadership all by yourself. There is a Westfield High School graduate who created a program. She had an autistic sibling. And what she did is she partnered with an organization that works with high schoolers with learning disabilities. And so what she did is she created a teen night, which some of you may have heard of, where neurologically, quote unquote, what would you call it? Mainstream students, so regular high school students who participate in the regular high school curriculum, act as hosts or guests at a party for students who, high school students who have developmental delays or on the autism spectrum. And they have these little parties once a month. It's hugely popular with the students who have the disabilities, who enjoy the opportunity to socialize like any normal teenager wants to, and is very, very rewarding for the mainstream students to be in that environment. And this was leadership exhibited by this one student, even though she didn't have a whole team, she didn't have, you know, a big organization, she just did it by herself. She didn't have a title, she just had a mission. And so think about ways that you can make contributions and exhibit leadership all by yourself. Finally, you just want to be a good person, a positive presence in your school and community. You want to do that for your own sake. You want to do that for the sake of your school and community. And frankly, in the long run, it'll make you more desirable to colleges. So here's where we end up. If you do all of those things, you're going to have an academic record that really demonstrates your strengths and interests, with or without test scores. You're going to have interesting, thoughtful essays that reveal who you are, because you will have done interesting, thoughtful things, and you'll have something to talk about. You're going to have an activities list that reflects what your passions and priorities are. You hated viola? Fine, but you were really interested in, I don't know, Jane Austen. And so you might have done some really cool things related to Jane Austen, or you might be interested in US history, and you volunteered at the Miller Corey House and worked in their colonial collections. Your activities list should really reflect what you love and what you're interested in. And finally, your counselor and teacher recommendations are going to be a window for the college admissions folks into what kind of person you are in the classroom and in the community and in the school. And they're going to vouch for you as somebody that a college wants on their campus and wants in their classrooms and wants to have as part of that little utopian community that I showed you at the beginning, with all of these artists and activists and musicians and scholars. So that is my spiel. As you know, Ann is our moderator, and Tim Lear is joining me to answer questions. So if anyone has any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A box and let us know what you're thinking, and we'll try to answer them. And is the Q&A open?
Yes, it is. The Q&A is open.
Okay.
And we actually did have a question that Tim answered for somebody, but I think that's a good thing. Tim, would you mind just talking to that question a little bit and your response to it? I think that's an interesting one for parents to hear your perspective.
Yeah, no, so the question was about kind of a conflict between a college visit and a student's obligation with the school, and kind of how should the student navigate that? I would definitely, contact the school ahead of time. It's amazing, Susanna touched on this, it's amazing how receptive they are right now. And the people who are picking up the phone aren't student interns, because they're, for the most part, not allowed on campus or in the office. It's the actual admission person who will be leading the committee, reading your child's application. And that sort of access is really unprecedented. That's one of the silver linings, at least in the field that Susanna and I work in. You really can talk to the people making the decisions. So encourage your children to own this process as much as they can. I really can't stress that enough. That's one of the things I would say, that students they're not accustomed to doing that. I have 3 children. I micromanage their lives and do everything that I tell the parents I work with not to do. This is a process that rewards students who take the initiative, put themselves out there, let the colleges get to know them. So as much as you can do that, encourage your child to do that.
Okay, terrific.
Okay, I'm gonna, we have a question from Jane, and I'm gonna ask her to unmute, and she's gonna tell us her question. She's unmuting. Here you go. Hi, Jane.
Hi,
nice
Ann.
to see your name.
Nice to see you as well. I have to apologize. I must have raised my hand by accident, so I'm so sorry.
Oh, come on. You have to have a question.
I probably do, but now I'm on the spot, so I'll come back if I do.
All right, come back, please.
Thanks for calling on me.
Anyone else with a question? I want to say also that I think that the point that Susanna made about calling on your network is a really important one right now. And it's not just the network, and I'm going to make another plug for the College Women's Club. It's not just the network of these kids. It's also the network of the parents of these kids. You know, we're all rooting for each one of you. So call on anybody you know and see how they might be able to give you a hand with this process. And especially in COVID, it's just so much more daunting in the current environment.
Absolutely.
Susanna, you had a great slide with the characteristics that colleges are looking for, and I loved looking at that. Anne had sent that to me yesterday, and the only thing I would add to that, and you've kind of touched on it in various comments, I think colleges were really almost obsessed for the last decade with students demonstrating expertise and almost a kind of graduate level proficiency in a discipline. That over the last 7 months has, I think, shifted a fair bit, where not only do they want, character and leadership, which they've said they wanted, and I think now they actually need it, but I really think they're looking for kids to maybe not be experts, but to be a little bit more vulnerable than they're used to being, to demonstrate humility and kind of honesty to a degree that they haven't necessarily before. And that's something that I try to speak a lot to the students I'm working with about, because that doesn't really come naturally to high school students. I think they treat this like a job interview. And I think the admissions process isn't a job interview. I think it shares maybe some qualities of that, but the urge to appear perfect, to appear like a finished product, is actually the opposite of what colleges are looking for. Not that you want to lead with your imperfections, but I think that admitting mistakes, admitting vulnerabilities, admitting when you don't know something, especially now when all of us are overwhelmed, all of us are kind of scrambling, that's a way to connect in a human way. Let the transcript and grades test scores if you have them, activities, let those tell the kind of proficiency story. I think some of the essays are an opportunity to maybe show a little bit more of a human side that's slightly less polished than it would have been a year ago.
That's interesting. And I think that's in keeping with the fact that colleges want students who are going to grow while they're on campus. They don't want kids who show up and say, yeah, I'm great. I'm everything you need.
Yeah.
I'm done. I'm ready. You know, lucky you if you get me. They
Yeah.
want students who want to learn. They want students who want to meet different kinds of people and learn different kinds of things and broaden their experience base. Because let's face it, a lot of our kids are growing up in bubbles, and it's a huge growth experience as a person and as a citizen to meet people with different backgrounds and different stories, and to realize that there are lives out there that are so completely different from ours, and how much we can learn from that, and how much we can, you know, really improve our outlook and our approach to life in general, and certainly to life after college. So colleges want students who are willing to grow, not students who think that they're already perfect.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it looks like somebody, Ingrid typed in a great question about what we think the upside of COVID will be in college admissions. I mean, I don't know if it's an upside. For some schools, it will be a downside. For some, an upside. I started, you know, early in March, almost keeping a ledger of the schools that I felt were exhibiting real leadership and character, and those that were falling short. And kind of what do I mean by that? I think the schools that weren't afraid to make an announcement, be transparent, take a lead. So for instance, Dickinson College in Carlisle was one of the first schools in the country to send its students home. There hadn't been a reported case on campus or in Carlisle when they made that decision. Well, why did they make that? They were kind of lampooned for about 24 hours until everybody, their president was in Africa during the Ebola crisis, and she knows her stuff, has a medical background. She really marshaled the energy and the resources of that school in a productive way. They haven't been following anybody's lead. They've been creating a path. She was on a call with Vice President Pence, the president of the college, 2 weeks ago. She was on a call with the Pennsylvania governor a week ago. So I look at Dickinson, a school that some of us don't put next to a Haverford or a UPenn, and yet in many ways, you know, they exhibited leadership that some of the Ivy League schools did not, frankly. So I think it's been one upside for me has been identifying those schools that will support students, not be afraid to make a tough call, and will kind of lead the effort. You know, MIT is another one which is not surprising, but all of their resources were running towards the problem, saying, how do we solve this? And less so about you know, trying to guard tuition, trying to you know, debate testing and all of that, which is important, but there were bigger problems, and I think some schools are tackling those instead of the minutia.
I think you're right. And I think one thing we need to keep in mind is there was no one right answer for every school. Because I'll give you an example. Cornell University looked into whether they should open or close the campus this fall. And for a lot of schools, the answer has been, we're keeping the campus closed. Everyone's going to have to stay home and work remotely. And that might have been the right answer, and, you know, totally fine. But what Cornell discovered was, because a significant part of their student body, and it's a big school, 14,000 undergrads, and I don't even know how many graduate students, but lots. What they discovered was that 70% of their undergrads would have come back to Ithaca anyway to live off campus. And so Cornell said, okay, so our choice isn't either our students stay home in their home states and their hometowns, or they come to campus and we have to deal with COVID. 70% of those students are coming anyway. And if we are not taking ownership of that situation, and if we are not recognizing that they are here, and if we don't consider the campus open to the degree that we can open, then there will be no testing, there will be no contact tracing, there will be no quarantine, there will be no isolation, and things for the Ithaca community will get much, much worse, not to mention for the students themselves. And so keeping the campus closed was not a viable option for them. And so they said, fine, we're going to open, but these are the terms and conditions under which we're going to do it. Now, fortunately, Cornell is a wealthy school. They also have a school of agriculture. They have the laboratory space, the capacity to hire technicians and all the chemicals and all the different equipment that they need in order to do testing. And they had testing upon entry. They now require every single student gets tested twice a week, every single faculty and staff member. So they have the resources, but they also have the know-how and the determination to manage COVID with students on campus and nearby off campus. So I wouldn't fault Cornell for opening because they actually made the right decision given their circumstances. There are other schools that shouldn't have opened, certainly not the way they opened. And then there are schools that did open and did so successfully. So every single school has to be looked at individually, but also how they treated the students when they had to close and how they treat students who don't have home situations where they can stay home. I admire colleges who have said, okay, we have to close the campus. However, if a student has circumstances where they cannot possibly engage in remote learning because they live in a very, very small, cramped home, they don't have Wi-Fi, they perhaps have an unhealthy situation in terms of family dynamics at their home, and they're not going to be able to be productive students, they then selectively allowed those students to come to campus in a safe way. And I think that that's very humane and much better than just kicking everybody off and saying, that's it, you're on your own, figure it out. So these are complicated times, and money factors into it, but also just the values and the wisdom of the management of these colleges is really important. And I appreciate your telling me about Dickinson, because I have long admired Dickinson College. I think it's a fantastic school. And this just, is another feather in their cap.
Yeah, the president of the University of Miami is another very well-connected, I think, a medical doctor who's actually now running the university and has been communicating a lot about COVID and what his understanding of it is, and trying to keep the University of Miami going. And they've done all sorts of pretty cool stuff down there to keep the university open.
That's great. That's terrific to hear. There's a question that just came across. Is it true that students primarily compete against their own classmates from the same school when they apply to the same university? If so, should they attempt to stand out or differentiate themselves from their classmates as a primary strategy? For example, take an SAT subject test when others haven't taken it. Well, I think, Tim, you should answer this one because you are a college counselor for a school. How do you answer that?
It's a fantastic question. And I've been doing this for 20 years and in independent schools for 25. And that question always comes up. And I don't think parents believe my answer ever. I don't think they ever have or will. But there really isn't a quota on how many students from a high school an extremely competitive college will admit. And I'll give you an example. My first year at Pingree, Columbia University accepted 4 students. None of them attended, which I about fell out of my chair and said, okay, now no one's getting in. You can't have a 0% yield at a school that competitive. And the next year they took 11 students. The next year they took 1 student. So what I've experienced over the past 25 years is kind of an inconsistent consistency, that what they want in a given year changes pretty dramatically. And when I spoke to our Columbia representative, who's still there, she's been there for over 30 years, and I was kind of saying, wow, it's unbelievable, you took 11 people. And she said, well, next year, Tim, we may take nobody because our needs shift every single year. Institutional needs are varied. It'll make the process seem chaotic. Does a school want geographic diversity, academic diversity, racial diversity, socioeconomic, et cetera, athletic? All of those are, they shift every single year. It seems chaotic from the outside, but we want that chaos, because if every school was looking for the same formula, then if your child didn't get into Bucknell, nor would they get into Lehigh or Lafayette or Colgate. So the chaos on the outside actually means that the schools are doing their job. They're looking for kids who fit their needs, And what Cornell wants is not what Dartmouth wants, even though they're in the same athletic conference. It's not an academic conference, it's an athletic conference. And I think we often will mistake that and assume that Williams and Amherst are fighting for the same kids. They're really not. I think that's the great thing that I've seen is Westfield High School will, send lots of kids, and they're not going to take number 1, 2, 3, 4, even if a high school ranks. We do not, but they have ways of internally ranking them according to their needs, whether they need economists, physicists. Yale a couple of years ago really started growing its STEM program and computer science program. So it was easier to get into Yale if you wanted to put computer science, because they were trying to get the kids who were applying to Carnegie Mellon and MIT and Cornell. And that's luck of the draw. You never know what a school's institutional needs will be. They don't telegraph those. If they did, they would lose applications. So they pretend that they're all things to all people all the time, which they're not. We then do the autopsy, every spring and summer to try and anticipate those.
So I'm going to read you the next question from our Q&A, and it's this question of taking a gap year, especially for this year's seniors, which leads to the other question: what's going to happen to the class of 2025 if a bunch of kids take a gap year in the class of 2024? So I'll hand it over to you guys.
So it depends on what you're going to do with the gap year. And it depends on what you're trying to achieve. If you're a senior now, I don't think it makes sense to try to game the system by saying, well, if I take a gap year, then I'm going to have a better chance of getting in the following year. Nobody knows what's happening the following year. I don't think acceptance rates are going to significantly change from last year to this year. Colleges who have had more students than usual take a gap year already, they're saying, well, fine, so we have more beds open next year. Maybe we can take extra students in next year's class. So it might not be an advantage to wait. Secondly, you really have to think about what are you going to do that's productive for your gap year. Traditionally, a lot of kids spent gap years traveling abroad. That's not an option now. They might have spent it doing volunteer work in their community. Well, that might not be a possibility because they might not be able to meet in person with the communities that they want to serve. So it's not that there isn't anything useful and productive that a student can do, but they really need to think about what that would be, and would that make them a stronger applicant next year, and would that make them more desirable? Also, you have to be super careful about whether you take any college courses. If you're like, oh, well, I really want to study economics, so I'm going to take a couple of courses at my local community college, that could be totally fine at some colleges. At others, they might say, nope, you took courses for college credit, you are now a transfer student. And that can totally change your chances of admission, that can change your chances of financial aid. So make sure that you have an idea of which colleges you'll ultimately be interested in applying to, and go through with a fine-tooth comb their policies as to what you can and cannot do during your gap year. And if that means you get on the phone and you contact admissions and you ask them questions and you take notes or you send emails, do that, because the answer you get from one college will not be the same as the answer you get from another. And you don't want to find out that those awesome courses that you took, 2 courses might not be the problem, but 4 courses could be, will ultimately disqualify you from applying as a first-year student. Tim, do you have anything to add to that?
I think the only thing I would add, I'm not a big fan of students taking a gap year now because they want to avoid the chaos that, and the unpredictability on the college campuses. I actually think, and it's easy for me to say with my children a couple years away from college and not paying the tuition yet, but I think this is a great time to be a smart consumer. And if your child is going to be a freshman and the school underperforms and doesn't really adequately educate them and do a virtual hybrid learning environment, doesn't build community the way that it promised it would, transfer. That is kind of, a secret way to get into a great school. You can do a do-over. This past year, we had 6 Pingree students. Our classes are about 140. We had 6 students who ended up getting into schools that had rejected them the year before. Some of them were, they didn't, you know, I don't think doing a do-over is a great idea. You can go through life constantly second guessing. These were kids looking for different programs. So they wanted mechanical engineering, and their school really had electrical, et cetera. It wasn't just because their roommate situation didn't work out. But I think as parents and students, it's a great time to say, okay, you said you would provide this. Here's what I'm experiencing. You don't need to stay for 4 years and be unhappy. So I would absolutely embrace the opportunity to, you know, join the real world. Everyone's struggling through this. People are having to adapt and learn new skills, and also learn what they're not so good at, and then try and tackle that. Kids are going to be doing Zooms forever. I mean, this is not going away. And so they better get used to it. They better get used to forming connections and telling their story in a somewhat virtual way.
Mm-hmm. So Tim, that leads to the next question, and that is, you know, of the kids who have decided this year who were class of 2024, who have decided not to enter school, but to take a gap year, how does that affect the numbers that the colleges are accepting for the class of 2025? And do we predict an impact, or is it not going to be?
Yeah, I think there absolutely will be an impact. I agree with Susanna. I think you said that you don't necessarily think it'll be this year. I think that, you know, the statistic that I'm hearing is between 10 and 20% of students in the incoming freshman classes elected to defer at many schools. That's kind of the range that I'm hearing, you know, 10 to 20. Colleges are so worried about their brand right now and their reputation that I think they're going to do everything they can to preserve the size of the next class, to preserve their image and reputation. I actually think in 2 years we'll see the full picture. You know, are international students going to come back? Yes. Are they going to come back and make up 14 to 18% of a freshman class? Not in 1 year. Are students from New York going to want to go all the way to California or even the Midwest? Probably not right away. I think that state schools will see a big surge because I think kids are absolutely going to be looking closer to home. They may apply in a kind of diverse way and cast a wide net, but the reality when it comes to depositing, I think there's going to be a 1 to 2 year kind of surge in home bodies with people who just kind of want to be within a 4-hour radius if possible. And I think that's shared with adults and kids. So I think the real number the story will tell itself in 2 years. This year, I think there's going to be a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of clever accounting to make it seem like it's not that disruptive, but it has to be, given the disruptions of the last 6-7 months. That's not going to it's not going to work itself out of the system in a cycle. No way.
Yeah, and I think to Tim's point earlier, I think students need to make choices between the choices that actually exist. So the choices are go to college, potentially still under COVID, potentially with 2 or 3 or all of your classes remote, but maybe you can be on campus, you know, maybe with not the activities you'd like, maybe with not the freedoms that you would like, maybe with not everyone you want to have on campus present, or stay home. Or maybe try to fashion some kind of gap year option. You don't have an option C, which is the perfect ideal college experience. That is not currently an option. And so I think some kids are holding out for that perfect option, that perfect scenario with, you know, playing Frisbee on the quad on a beautiful fall day. Actually, Frisbee's still happening, but we have to deal with the choices we have, not the choices we wish we had. And so I personally have been encouraging people, if they feel safe, if they don't have pre-existing conditions that make them vulnerable, if they feel that the university or college is being responsible, doing entry testing, during surveillance testing, really managing it intelligently, to go to college if they can. Because I don't think that putting your life on hold is always the right option, because the perfect experience you're waiting for may not happen, or it may not happen anytime soon.
Right, right. We have one more question that I want to get to, which is an interesting one.
Yeah.
Students today seem particularly motivated to pursue activities connected to issues in the news, such as racial diversity, climate change, social injustice, even COVID. Would university admissions offices see the pursuit of these types of activities more as fads rather than useful academic interests? In parentheses, Susanna, such as reading Dostoevsky or learning the ukulele. So I'm going to say that this will be our last question. We're right at 8 o'clock. I think we're going to answer this one and call it an evening. I just want to thank you so much for your time. So go ahead, guys.
Well, so I'll say colleges just want interesting, thoughtful people.
Mhm.
And playing the ukulele, learning how to ride a unicycle, that's quirky, it's fun, it's interesting. They don't want a 2,000 or 10,000 kids on campus who all have the same interests, the same values, the same objectives. They don't want all pre-meds. They want all different kinds. They want a well-rounded community of individuals. And so whatever you like, if it's Dostoevsky or if it's Harry Potter or Twilight, whatever you are into, do it to the fullest, enjoy it, and do it well. And that will make you attractive. And in terms of Black Lives Matter or whatever the other movements are, colleges are always interested in students who take current issues seriously and who act upon them and who really want to make sure that the values that they hold dear are spread and shared in the country, in the community, in the world, whether that's Greenpeace or, you know, faith values or whatever. They just want people who think about things, who care about things, and who will act upon them. Tim, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. You had said earlier in one of your slides that they're building a class, and in order to do that, they need activists. They also need cellists and economists and kids who can listen and be a confidant. I think that the one thing I would stress is, and again, I'm echoing what you said earlier, is kids need to be honest about who they are right now. The best story I heard years ago from Fred Hargadon, who had been the Dean of Admissions at Swarthmore and Stanford and Princeton, the head of the College Board. When he was at Stanford, they used to have a question, which then Common App adopted it. That is, is there something that you want to tell us about yourself that you haven't been able to in the application? And it's worded more elegantly, but kind of tell us something that we don't know. And he was looking through all of the deny pile. He read every application and he was going through, and there was a deny with not a great student, but the student had answered that question in 2 sentences. My test scores are low, they are accurate. That was it. He actually plucked that student, and this is in the Wall Street Journal. If you Google this, you'll find it from like 1983. He took that student out of the pile and he said, wow, I've read nothing but CEOs and Heisman winning quarterbacks to be. Here we have a student who's actually telling the truth. How refreshing. That student was admitted and thrived at Stanford. And he kept in touch. He was a kind of a fascinating person, but that's pretty common. I think that when you're honest and you're enthusiastic about something, that genuine enthusiasm is so infectious. We all know it. When we're around somebody who loves what they do, we want to be around that person. When we used to have dinner parties, that's who we wanted to sit next to.
Right.
And it's so risky to tell our kids to do that because, I was at a Little League game yesterday and my son struck out about 100 times and I was reliving my own futility. And it's amazing how the urge to kind of rush in there and do it for them, to kind of protect them from the disappointment, the teasing, the self-criticism, whatever. The college process exposes all of those anxieties that we experienced as applicants and teenagers, and then now as parents. We really will feel it more acutely than the kids do. We have to kind of really take a step back and say, hey, my child is who he is or who she is. Let them express that, trust that the process is going to work out, and then kind of go from there. And it is really hard to do, and it doesn't sound right. It sounds like a Hallmark card, but that's kind of what I've learned over the years. We all have to do, including myself.
I think that's 100% right. And I think sometimes colleges know whether you belong better than you know whether you belong. There have been times where I've had a student apply somewhere and I'm like,
Yeah.
you know, you have what it takes, but I'm not sure you're a good fit. And I wouldn't quite say that, but, and sure enough, the college is like, thank you, no, thank you. And then the student ends up going someplace that was a much better fit and they're 1,000 times happier.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point, because they know the full applicant pool. They know who they've admitted, and no one's admitted in isolation. So that's actually, instead of focusing on the schools that your child doesn't get into, look at the ones where they get in and say to yourself, wow, like they've been admitted here because they're going to fit with all these other wonderful kids from around the world. How incredible is that? And really investigate those opportunities rather than looking at the missed opportunities. Our instinct is to look at where we didn't get in and to say,
Exactly.
well, why didn't they want me? Instead, it really is kind of remarkable that they'll choose your child because of the dozens of other incredible kids that they're going to learn from and help kind of grow and educate. So that interaction, which is something that until you're in a committee room, you don't quite understand that. And colleges really don't let us into the committee room very often, but that, you know, the process does work, and your child's going to be happy when they go to a school that selected them.
Right. And, you know, I'm just going to make one more point. I know Anne is trying to wrap up. To what Tim said, let's keep your eye on the prize. The objective is for your child to go to one college. They can't go to 10 colleges or 5 colleges. They can only go to one. So a friend of mine's daughter had applied to 10 schools and was rejected by 9. And my friend was really worried that the daughter was just going to fall apart with all these rejections. And instead, the daughter was thrilled. She said, I can only go to one school. It doesn't do me any good to get admitted to more than one school. And this is a great school, and I'm going to have a great time. And she did. She did phenomenally well there, was incredibly happy, and has lots of opportunities as a result. So keep in mind, the objective is not to get into 10 schools, it's to get into one. And just make sure that when you're creating a list for your student, that you have a wide range of schools, all of which are good fits, some of them tougher to get into, some of them easier to get into for your student, but that at the end of the day, they only need to get into one.
Thank you for that. So Tim, 2 books to recommend to our audience, and Susanna, I'll ask you the same thing.
Ooh.
Right. Well, first one would be Who Gets In and Why by Jeff Salingo. Just came out a week ago. It's fantastic. The other one is nothing to do with college, and it's kind of morbid, but it's good. I promise. Stephen King's Pet Sematary, which I reread this summer because I needed a distraction, and I went to the macabre. But I think reading fiction, the more outlandish, the better, because these are outlandish times. So go back and read old Stephen King and then Jeff Salingo.
Excellent. Thank you. Susanna.
Well, he stole Jeff Salingo's book from me. I was going to mention that one. Certainly the now perennial Colleges That Change Lives book. It lists, I think, 45 or 46 small liberal arts colleges. People tend to focus on the University of Michigan, University of Virginia, you know, the big name schools. But there are so many liberal arts colleges that are, frankly, they're an incredible bounty in our country. I know students from other countries who come to the United States specifically because they want the liberal arts college experience, which is actually very unusual and hard to find in other countries. And people need to understand that liberal arts doesn't mean just art. Doesn't mean you're either a painter or a flautist. You can be a scientist, you can be a data scientist, a computer scientist, you can study mathematics and physics and chemistry. So liberal arts just means that it's a liberal education in the sense that you have a broad range of options, that you get a more well-rounded education, that you learn a little bit of everything, and that you learn how to think and how to apply ideas from different disciplines to one another. And it becomes a more enriching experience. And it's a false belief that employers are only looking for business majors and engineers, very specialized people. Quite the contrary, liberal arts students get jobs every year at investment banks, at consulting firms, at manufacturers, at marketing firms, at financial firms, at every place, because they know how to think. And many employers will say, I don't need you to know exactly what to do. I need you to know how to think. And then I will teach you what I need you to know in order to be successful in my business. But first and foremost, I need you to know how to think. And that's what a liberal arts education will do.
Okay, I'm going to make my 2 recommendations. I still love Wherever You Go, That's Not Who You'll Be. Frank Bruni, I can't remember. Tell me the exact name, guys. I don't remember.
Yep.
Where you go is not who you'll be.
Something like that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And my fiction recommendation is A Gentleman from Moscow by M.R. Towell. If you haven't read that one, it's fabulous.
Great book.
Okay, well, thank you everyone who joined us this evening. Thank you to our 2 wonderful guests tonight. We so appreciate it. And please do have a look at the College Women's Club of Westfield website. And if you're feeling generous tonight, make a little donation. And if you're feeling great about us, why don't you join the College Women's Club of Westfield? We'd love to have you. And we will be back to you soon about our next webinar in our series, COVID, college admissions in the COVID landscape. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you. Good night.
Great. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.